First, we were told Trump's state court conviction proves Biden's corruption, and now somehow Hunter Biden's federal court conviction does too. We'll help you respond to this pretzel of an argument from the right. Secret audio of Supreme Court justices talking to guests at a party is a very 2024 type of news story. We'll get into it. We had some elections yesterday worth talking about, and some new executive orders meant to cut down border crossings as well. Meanwhile, how worried should we be about Trump's strong numbers as compared to Biden's? Stick around to the end if you want to know our answers. Welcome back to the podcast for the 54% of Americans who regularly vote for progress in every election and want to convince their friends and family members to join our majority. This is Majority 54.
Well, Jason, Biden's evil plan is well underway here. He has, stage one here is getting his son convicted of a federal crime, and it is going swimmingly. A federal jury in Delaware has convicted Hunter Biden on felony gun charges. This is stemming from his purchase of a Colt revolver in 2018 when he was addicted to cocaine. We've talked about this a lot. There was it seemed like they were ready for a plea deal at some point and bowed to pressure from Republicans to, muddy that up. I don't think a lot of people were surprised by this verdict. The evidence seemed pretty overwhelming. He could face up to 25 years in prison, although nobody thinks he'll get anything close to that. And Biden has responded quite differently than one could imagine the former president responding.
Yes, to say the least. I think what I want to highlight here is that because I went ahead and commented on this on Twitter. I'm going to keep calling it Twitter, and what I've noticed lately is that if I go ahead and comment on something on Twitter in particular, it's sort of like dipping my foot into the pool of Republican conspiracy theories and whatever the GOP talking points are on something, which is really helpful for us doing this show, is that if I want to know what it is people in our audience are hearing from their conservative friends and family members about a particular topic, I just say what I think about it on Twitter, and then I get a barrage of it in the replies. And what I got a huge chorus of, as if it's just an accepted fact, was the idea that President Biden had actually attempted to intervene in this and get a sweetheart deal for his son. Now, as I've tried to research this, the closest thing I can find to this is that the special counsel who was, I believe, appointed, who's a Republican, right? And was at one point a U.S. attorney appointed by Trump.
Correct.
That he was treating this the way any other or a typical case charging this particular crime was to be treated, which he was, I believe, pleading it down and not looking for prison time. And then, as you said, it seems there was a lot of pressure on him from the right. And so then he pulled back on that and said, no, we're going to trial and we're not taking a plea. And so I think that's what our audience is going to hear from right-wing friends and family members, which is that turned into Biden is corrupt because Biden tried to get a sweetheart deal and a plea agreement for his son.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you've got this conviction coming out of Biden's Justice Department. You've got the Menendez trial, going to be underway soon. You have the Democratic representative down in Texas who's been indicted. So it seems like this Justice Department has no problem going after Democrats. And I think the most important thing from a political perspective, obviously there's a private family matter, and Biden said he stood by his son and the man he is today. And I think the context here is important when we talk about the personal story. This guy had just lost his brother. And generally speaking, on either side of the aisle, we tend not to cheer on people's drug addictions. And as Jordan Klepper pointed out last night in the Daily Show, this seems to be the one and only time that Republicans seem to be excited about pursuing a gun charge. And he joked that maybe Biden should adopt all of America so that we can get gun control, because it seems to be the only way they're excited about going after people is if it's Biden's son.
And let's talk about the gun charge. Like, first of all, the law is a good law. I mean, the law says, like, if you're addicted to drugs, you shouldn't be able to buy a weapon. And furthermore, that if a cousin of this law, which we could talk about in a second, is that if you have a felony conviction, you're not supposed to have a firearm. But we should pause for a moment to talk about the fact that Hunter Biden is being convicted of buying a pistol, right? Which, again, I think the law is right that if you're addicted to drugs, you shouldn't have a pistol. You shouldn't be able to buy one. It's part of the background check. But I do think it's important that that is the least of the weapons that these folks want to have widely legal. Not to mention the fact that I believe Trump recently in his pre-sentencing report said that he owns a firearm in Florida, which is not allowed for someone who is currently a convicted felon. So anyway, not that any of that matters probably, but.
Well, I do think what matters here is the juxtaposition of how Biden has treated this versus how Trump has treated his conviction and certainly would treat a similar situation, right? So, what do we know here? We know that Biden says he's not going to pardon his son. He's going to accept the judgment. The White House was asked about a commutation today, and the press secretary said she hadn't spoken to Biden about that. So, some of this could change. But assuming Biden isn't going to in any way intervene with this verdict, which is what all signs seem to point to, then, and he has, kept this at arm's length the entire way, as has Garland, hasn't intervened in any way, has given full independence to a Trump appointed prosecutor. Could you imagine any of this happening in the Trump administration?
No,
Trump pardoned
you
Bannon.
don't think if Don Jr. is in federal court, you don't think that
There would
Trump
be no
will
charges.
use
There would
a
be no trial.
Biden-appointed U.S. attorney to prosecute him?
There would be no charges. There would be no trial, right?
Yeah, he'd be
Like,
pre-pardoned.
it's pretty obvious.
I mean,
And
he's pre-pardoned. I mean, anyway.
so I think that juxtaposition is important here. Now, how many people it's going to convince? Who knows? I almost think that game doesn't matter along the way here. We just kind of, we focus on what's in front of us each time. And in this case, the juxtaposition is very clear, and we should not be playing defense on this. Like, in a strange way, the conviction of the president's son actually highlights something important about the president as it compares to his predecessor. Again, Trump pardoned Bannon, somebody who he publicly ridiculed every step of the way. There's no question he would have pardoned his sons.
Yeah, let's make sure we lay this out real clean for folks who are listening to this of how to talk about it. First of all, I'm still on the fence about whether bringing up Trump's conviction with people you're trying to convince individually is even that helpful. I still am of the belief that the best arguments we have are policy arguments, because the things that the Republican Party and particularly Trump stands for are unpopular. But if you're going to bring it up, this is going to come back at you. And I think it's really important to make this distinction, is that Trump was convicted by a state court that Biden has no control over whatsoever. He, in fact, was convicted on stuff that the Biden Justice Department had declined to prosecute. There is some truth to that right-wing talking point. But the state court moved forward, and the state court got a conviction of Trump. Now, Biden's son was convicted after being prosecuted by a federal prosecutor. If you're gonna skip the special counsel part, which they want to, then I guess you would take their logic and say, so a Biden prosecutor indicted, charged, prosecuted, and got a conviction of Biden's son. And whereas Trump obviously would pardon himself from any federal offense and has pardoned many other people who did crimes on his behalf from federal offenses, and would do it if it were a state offense if he could, Biden has said that he won't pardon his own. So there is a huge difference. Now, all that said, I would just caution people about getting too down this rabbit hole, because if they have you talking about Hunter Biden's court cases, then they are successfully mitigating the damage of Trump's conviction. And that's what they want. That's what if you go all the way back to what Trump was originally impeached for, which was trying to create a bogus cloud of corruption around Joe Biden via a conversation with Zelensky, what feels like a lifetime ago. That's what this has all been. We know our guy is corrupt. If we can make the other guy look like he's corrupt too, then maybe people aren't so worried about our guys' corruption. That's what we're dealing with.
Well, one thing also worth mentioning here is all of the false promises along the way that this was going to land at Biden's doorstep and that he was going to be implicated in some kind of international conspiracy.
Right.
Not only has that not happened, and it's been promised for years, but along the way, we got Mr. Smirnov, right? Like a Russian spy, basically, who is their main
I
witness
almost
in this
forgot
case.
about that dude.
Yeah. And we also not only have they not gotten Joe Biden on an international criminal conspiracy, they haven't gotten Hunter Biden on an
Right.
international criminal conspiracy. That's how far they are from their goals in this
Yeah.
project.
Now, what we should remember is that this is not over. The special prosecutor said that there's more because of the tax issues, and it looks like that may go to trial in September, which I'll be honest, not ideal politically. All right, for Hunter Biden to be on trial for anything in September of this election year, and honestly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about how it shouldn't be this hard. But I think it's okay to acknowledge that it's kind of discouraging that when you are the Democrats in this country, you have a candidate on the opposite side who is a genuine criminal who has miraculously only been convicted of 34 counts as opposed to what I think are probably the hundreds of things over the course of his life that he's done to fracture the law. And he has all these pending trials, and yet what trial is actually going to be in the news in September of the election year? Probably not Trump, probably the president's son on stuff that is really just related to drug addiction. It's never going to be easy. There's no shortcuts. It's tough.
Well, the former President Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, was on TV, and he said some things that I want to highlight here. Let's go to this clip.
He said, for example, he wants to prosecute Mark Milley, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, for daring to have a conversation with his Chinese counterpart in the run-up to January 6th to assure the Chinese that they needn't worry. Trump says that's treason, and he reminded people that the death penalty used to apply. I think he's very serious. He may joke about it a little bit, but this will be a retribution presidency, and I think the Justice Department will be where the rubber meets the road.
Jason, call me old-fashioned, but when the former national security advisor, the former chiefs of staff, many, the former defense secretary, we can keep going. The former vice president, all these people seem to think that Trump is a threat to our country. That seems notable, and actually, I do think this is something that we should highlight for voters. Like, if I'm testing ads, I'm testing ads that show one face after another and say defense secretary, national security advisor, vice president, and just has quotes about how they think he's unfit for office. I mean, if this country is worth saving, that should move some voters.
I totally agree. And here's the ad I would make. I would make a parody ad, and it would be a job interview, and it would be somebody you wouldn't even know what the company is, and it'd be somebody sitting across the desk and saying like, okay, well, I got your application. And I noticed that you've held the position before, but can you speak to the fact that, and then you just list all, and you're like,
I love this ad.
literally everyone who worked with you when you held the job before has gone out of their way to contact me and say that if I hire you, it might be the end of this company. Do you have anything to say to that? And then just have the person sit there.
Well,
Like,
okay,
"Whoa, whoa."
Biden campaign, if you're listening, or super PACs like Adisu, I think that'd be a great ad. I like that ad
Right?
a lot.
Because I think you've got to make it relatable for folks. Like, you would not hire somebody who, like, you wouldn't rehire someone who the last time they had the job, every single person who worked for them is like, you can't hire them again. Like, I'm against you hiring them. In fact, I want you to hire the person who, like, I got fired when this person came in. Like,
Yeah.
it's like
And even the
I
people
lost
who
my
say,
job when the new person got a job, and I think the new person's better.
even the hacks who say they're still going to vote for him, like Bill Barr, everything that comes before I'm going to vote for him is not
Yeah,
flattering.
yeah, because what we know is they don't mean I'm going to vote for him. They mean I'd like to have a future in Republican politics after this.
Right.
So these are the magic words I have to say, which is so sad.
Well, okay, we're going to take a break. There is a whole lot going on. We're going to talk about some secret tapes from Alito exciting, and his wife, terrifying. And we're going to also talk about an election that happened earlier this week. There's a couple of interesting results from around the country, all this and more when we come back. Lumen is the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath. And on the app, it lets you know if you're burning fat or carbs and gives you tailored advice to improve your nutrition, workout, sleep, and even stress management. All you have to do is breathe into your Lumen first thing in the morning, and you'll know what's going on with your metabolism and whether you're burning mostly fats or carbs. And then Lumen gives you a personalized nutrition plan for that day based on your measurements. You could also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals, so you know exactly what's going on in your body in real time. And Lumen will give you tips to keep on top of your health game. This is really important. I've been running this fitness community for years, and often what I hear from people is, my metabolism is X, my metabolism is Y. But this actually gives you the data to actually confirm or in some ways challenge some assumptions you have about your body. And because your metabolism is at the center of everything your body does, optimal metabolic health translates to a bunch of benefits, including easier weight management, improved energy levels, better fitness levels, better sleep, and it could track your cycle as well as the onset of menopause and adjust your recommendations to keep your metabolism healthy through hormonal shifts so you can keep up your energy and stave off cravings. So if you want to take the next step in improving your health, go to lumen.me/majority to get 15% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/majority for 15% off your purchase. Thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. These days, a lot of people are learning about all the benefits of fasting, like weight loss, mental and physical performance, and gut health. But what about the whole not eating part? Well, that's exactly why Prolon was created. Introducing Prolon, a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. Researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute and backed by leading U.S. medical centers, Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar and support cardiovascular health and reduce abdominal fat. But Prolon isn't a diet. Prolon is a science based on Nobel Prize-winning discoveries in medicine. And this all starts with Prolon's 5-day program. Snacks, soups, and beverages, all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It's unlike anything you've experienced before. I did the 5-day program, and I feel so much better. Prolon really isn't like any other diet I've tried because it's not a diet. It truly is science. It was so convenient, and the best part, they sent me everything I needed all in one box. And it's no wonder thousands of doctors now recommend Prolon to support healthy blood sugar and cardiovascular health. Right now, Prolon is offering Majority 54 listeners 15% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/majority54. That's PROLON life.com/majority54 for the special offer. That's prolonlife.com/majority54. You know, something I'm not proud of, Jason, is I love me a secret tape. You know, one day I'll probably be on the receiving end of one of these and I'll retract everything I'm about to say. But they just reveal people for who they truly are. And we were gifted a few. There was one from Sinwar, the Hamas leader, but that's not for this podcast. That came out this week as well. But these Alito tapes I thought were eye-opening. This was from a filmmaker who basically posed at a Supreme Court event and somehow got both Alito and Roberts to open up, and also Alito's wife, which we'll get to. And they performed quite differently, the two justices. Let's start with Samuel Alito.
Know that we can negotiate with the left in the way that needs to happen for the polarization to end. I think that it's a matter of winning.
I think you're probably right. I mean, one side or the other is going to win. I don't know. I mean, there can be a way of working, a way of living together peacefully, but it's difficult, because there are differences on fundamental things that really can't be compromised. So it's not like we're going to split the difference.
Spoiler alert, it's not like you can split the difference. Alito, in his own words, about whether or not the right and the left can ever, quote, live together or work together, quote, peacefully.
Jason, this is really like the old story of King Solomon. That's how I see this. That's what he's saying, you know?
What
Like one
that
of the oldest judges that we have in folklore, you know? Isn't that the whole point of that story? You don't
that
split the baby in half?
yeah, I guess that's what he's. I mean, if the baby is America,
Yeah.
but I don't know how I feel about the secret tape thing. A secret tape is one thing. Um, when you're recording a conversation that someone has entered into without prompting. I do, and look, I'm not trying to defend Alito. I don't think that Alito said anything there that I didn't already assume he thought.
Yeah.
I don't think he said anything there that was actually anywhere near as bad as it could have been for Alito for what he really thinks. But for me, when you have a secret recording that is where someone is they're basically acting as like undercover, and they are leading and prompting people to say something, it's, to me, not as much of a bombshell, if I'm being honest. Like, I think Alito probably hears that and is like, "Phew, man,
Yeah,
that
I
could have
agree.
been way worse."
I
you know
agree. I don't say I don't think I love what he had to say, and there were other things where she, basically talked it being like a Christian nation, and he basically confirmed that. And what's interesting to me is not that this is the thing that's going to prompt the recusals or some kind of impeachment or even outrage. It's just clarifying because in the
Mhm.
one hand we have what Alito said, and then on the other hand we have how Roberts handled the exact same prompting. And
Right.
to me, instead of like outrage and getting going crazy, and frankly, like some of my reaction to some of the other stuff that Alito has done, I think this just requires like a sober assessment of, hey, on the one hand, we have one guy who we have just one new little piece to confirm that he's a culture warrior and a political operative, and on the other hand, Roberts, who was given the same questions, basically challenged the woman who was asking him these questions and said, "Look, I've got Muslim friends, I got Jewish friends. I don't think this is an inherently Christian nation. It's also not the job of a judge to, basically, dictate policy. And our country's been divided before. I'm optimistic that we can get out of this." Like he's saying all the things you'd want your chief justice to say in that moment.
Absolutely.
And so I
Absolutely.
think,
And again, not something that was unexpected. I mean, I think that's what we thought Roberts believed.
yeah,
Um,
I just think if
but
I were Alito, not that he gets embarrassed, but I would just be embarrassed by that juxtaposition, right? That would
yeah,
embarrass me, you know,
yeah,
because all the setup things being true, and all the jokes aside about secret tapes, yes, it can catch people in a terrible light. Also, when you decide to share only part of it, I don't know how much she shared. All of that aside, he failed a certain test. Now, there's really no newsworthiness of this particular part of it, but I just think it's too funny not to share. Is let's listen in on how Alito's wife handled this.
You know what I want? I want a Sacred Heart of Jesus flag because I have to look across the lagoon at the Pride flag for the next month.
Exactly.
And he's like, oh, please don't put up a flag. I said, I won't do it because I'm deferring to you. But when you are free of this nonsense, I'm putting it up, and I'm going to send them a message every day. Maybe every week I'll be changing the flags. There'll be all kinds. I made a flag in my head. This is how I satisfy myself. I made a flag. It's white, and it's yellow and orange flames around it. And in the middle is the word vergogna. Vergogna in Italian means shame.
Okay, a couple of things I want to point out here. Number one, I'm just going to leave it to the audience to wrestle with the "this is how I satisfy myself" comment, but I'm not going to go any further. There could be kids in the car. But second is, uh, I love that she calls he's done with this nonsense, as in I'm
yeah.
a Supreme Court justice, and the stuff that she's doing is flying flags. Honestly, this made me kind of feel bad for Alito in a way. If he weren't a Supreme Court justice, I'd be like, oh man, I can only imagine what that's like. And honestly, just calling balls and strikes here, this slightly tilts in favor of his narrative, which is that he, in her, like, obviously, like like unvarnished telling, he's trying to get her to take the things down.
Oh,
So
I've
I do think,
assumed that
yeah,
the whole way.
yeah,
I've always believed that his wife was the one who was doing that. I believed that. I don't know why. I didn't have any trouble believing that. But the problem for me is that he he didn't see the appearance of impropriety issue as strong enough to prevail upon his wife not to fly the flag. Also, I've never met anyone who's as into flags as this woman. Like, this is how she expresses herself generally. Another point about
Well,
this is
her husband deals with all that nonsense.
all that nonsense of, the court. Uh, you know, we shouldn't just pass by the fact that the simple appearance across a lagoon of a pride flag has her so exercised and upset that she wants to create a flag to aim at that flag, the main message of which is shame, that you should be not pride, but shame. I mean, that is the point that a justice of the US Supreme Court is making, is that to be gay is something for which you should never have pride, but you should always have shame. That's like really messed up, that's the house that he goes home to. As a
Yeah, and it's
sidebar,
coupled with, and Jason, he goes home to it, and it's coupled with some vague comments about like these irreconcilable visions for the country. I would
right,
want to know what his opinion. Now, we're never going to get these things because these are not accountable people in any sense. But I would want to know, like, does he have anything in the vicinity of that view? Because most mainstream Republicans do. We've talked about this before. Even Ben Shapiro, not too long ago, wrote, I think it was like when he was in his 20s or something, he wrote about how homosexuality should be included in the DSM as a mental disorder.
right. Yeah, and look, let's be clear. She didn't say that her husband disagreed with her. He just said, "Oh, please don't fly another flag." Right.
Yeah.
So, as a sidebar, just a little victory this week. I have a buddy who I've worked with at my job for a few years, and he's made quite a political journey, and it's been a lot of conversations with me from very real libertarianism to occasional more right wing republicanism to this week. He sent me me and a few others a text. It was a photograph of his window looking out at a neighbor's house, and the neighbor had put up like a big Trump sign and was like a big Trump person. And so he very conspicuously put out a Biden 2024 sign. And we were all like, wow, like what? And everybody was joking, like, wow, Kander has really broken you now. And so I sent the link to the article about Mrs. Alito and was like, look out, your neighbor might invert their flag if you continue this. But anyway, this is a thing I don't think I realized. And maybe everyone listening right now is like, oh yeah, this is a thing in my neighborhood, which is aiming signs and different political gestures back and forth at each other across neighborhoods. I never really thought about that, but I guess it's real.
Well, speaking of the Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas on Friday belatedly acknowledged more travel paid for by big-time donor Harlan Crow. And this was from 2019. He disclosed this, and it omits a whole bunch of other stuff that's in the public record from the rest of the trip. So ProPublica reported that Thomas flew on Crow's private jet and then boarded his super yacht. But yet, Jason, somehow that doesn't show up on these ethics disclosure. What is the point here? Like, I really don't get the point of this.
There isn't one. The point is we disclose things after we have been caught. Like that's what's happening. I mean, because
And he's been caught. He's not disclosing at all. It's like,
right.
use your metaphor. It's like getting caught shoplifting with a shopping cart full of stuff and then returning the apple on the top of the shopping cart. It's like, okay. And doing it very late after it's rotten.
Right. And being like, we're even now.
I don't know. And people hate when I talk about this. Tucked into this disclosure were other things that are nowhere equivalent, but I just think are improper. Ketanji Brown Jackson got like a couple $1,000s worth of Beyonce tickets from Beyonce. Now, do I think Beyonce is trying to influence the court? No. Do I think this isn't anywhere even in the vicinity of any of the stuff that Alito or Thomas have done? No. But the ethics rules should prohibit all gifts. That was true of us in the State Department. Anytime we got a gift, we gave it to the protocol office. The same is true of the White House. You shouldn't be able to accept gifts when you're in an office like that. I don't know what is going on over there. And honestly, for all the compliments I paid to Roberts, he really needs to get a handle on this. Like,
yeah,
I would see him try harder.
It's not that hard, right? If you're Roberts, you just do it. You're the chief. I mean, I don't think he needs like a majority vote of the court, I think he can put in rules. Because when you really, there's very few things that are responsibilities and powers that are given to the Chief Justice. For the most part, the Chief Justice is another vote. Right now, they get to decide like when they're in the majority, they get to decide who writes that opinion. They get to do some things like that. And they have the power, I believe, to write ethics rules for the court and to have a code of conduct for the court. So this could just happen. I would be surprised if in the next year there's not some sort of that Roberts doesn't do something. I mean, at some point, it's a matter of the legitimacy of the court across the board.
I think his hand is going to be forced. I think what's going to happen is the frustration from the liberal justices is going to boil over in public. It's going to happen either in a dissenting opinion that is going to be more barbed and direct and personal than anything we've seen before. It's going to be in certain coded language. Like I think we saw, and I think it might have been a Kagan opinion. She used the word upside down or something a few times, and people were trying to guess, like, is this some kind of code? I have no idea. Could have been written before all this flag controversy, for all I know. But I do think something's going to happen, and I wouldn't be shocked if there was some kind of press conference or interview that a Supreme Court justice gives that goes way further than anything that's happened before. I mentioned this before. I saw this in India in the case that I am covering on the Killing Justice podcast about India. The Supreme Court in India for the first time held a press conference because they felt like the Chief Justice of the court was manipulating the assignments of cases in ways that were burying certain cases of political significance. And so I think over the course of this next year, I think we have a high probability of seeing something that goes way further than anything we've seen before.
Man, I would hope so. Because when you think about it, of all the places in elected government at the national level where you're in charge of something, Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, honestly, is the lightest lift. I'm sorry. Like, it just is. Like, if you're Speaker of the House, if you're the Senate Majority Leader, if you're a committee chair in either House of Congress, let alone a cabinet secretary, there's just way more incoming every single day. And this is it, man. This is like
any justice,
one difficult decision as far as being in charge of other people.
Any of the justices, Thomas has famously slept through tons of oral arguments, right? You get the pick of the top law students in the country to write your opinions for you. You get 4 of them. Like, just imagine, I would just my days would be amazing. I'd just show up at 10 a.m. I'd be like, all right, I'm going to sleep through this oral argument. And then I'm going to just dictate a few bullet points to the smartest legal minds in the country. And then we'll just have a little talk about it. We'll go through some revisions. I don't have to write anything. And then I get huge offices and everybody leaves me alone and I have a job for life no matter what I do. So,
and every lawyer or judge, every member of the profession I chose to enter treats me like I walk on rose petals. I walk into the room and they all, I mean, so yeah, it's not that hard. I'm sorry. Step up, Roberts.
I agree. All right. Well, I think we've had enough of this Supreme Court. So there were election results here, and I'm really curious about your opinion of this guy, Sam Brown. So I didn't know much about him until these results came in, but he won the primary in Nevada. I don't know. You guys can correct me, people from that state. But he's an Army veteran who was the heavy favorite. He won. He is being positioned as a moderate, which is something we could talk about. The major questions there. He seemed like he's got an interesting background. He has combat experience. He was severely wounded, got a Purple Heart. It's very obvious. Like, he has very pronounced scars on his face. He has kind of gone back and forth on the abortion issue. In the past, he's expressed support for a 20-week ban with no exceptions for rape and incest. But after announcing his campaign for Senate, he clarified that he wouldn't support a nationwide ban. His wife has spoken publicly about her own abortion. The reason why I'm raising this is because we don't usually go through like state by state results. Is on the surface, this guy seems like a real, like, serious challenger to Rosen.
I think absolutely. And I didn't know anything about him either. And in preparing for today's episode, I went and watched the interview that he and his wife did on NBC. about her having had an abortion and his position on abortion. And yeah, I think the guy, look, here's what I think. I think he's a very serious challenger. I think he has a real chance to win this race. And I like Jackie Rosen. I've campaigned for Jackie Rosen and would help her again. But I do think he has a real serious chance, and people should take this really seriously. And part of me wants to believe that if he, a guy I would not support, does win, that maybe he wouldn't be one of the worst Republicans, just given the fact that he does seem like the way he talked about abortion in this interview is really smart. And it is the way that if the Republicans can get their stuff together, it's the way they should talk about it.
What did he say?
What he doesn't do is he doesn't take a explicitly pro-choice position, which I think they can't do politically anyway, even if he is there. But what he does do is he talks, and I saw this a lot when I was in the legislature, he talks a lot about making sure women know about other choices. Now, I'm not endorsing this. I'm just saying this is the strategy that I think politically is most effective for them. And I saw this when I was in the legislature in Missouri and when I was Secretary of State. There is a part of the anti-choice movement that focuses a lot on what they call pregnancy resource centers or crisis centers. And the idea is that they exist. They're usually religiously affiliated. And it's controversial because at least in Missouri, they were working very hard to try to get public funding. And what they do is they are supposed to be a place where they counsel women away from abortions and toward other options. But there's controversy about whether that's been being done ethically and that kind of thing. But with the way he talks about it, he doesn't talk about those, but I can hear it in that's what he means. Because what he's saying is, look, he expresses a lot of compassion for any woman who has to make this choice, is in this situation. He's saying that, prior to 24 weeks, he doesn't feel like he can judge them at all. Now, I looked it up. His wife has acknowledged that she had an abortion just before they met, and that it was at 5.5 weeks. And so what he's trying to get across is this idea that this is a real choice, that we should not villainize women who are faced with this choice, that it is an extremely difficult thing they go through. And the olive branch that I think he's trying to offer to the right is we have to make sure that women have all the possible information and about their options. So look, on the spectrum of anti-choice positions, this is among the least objectionable to me. It's not one that because I know what he's really saying, it's not one that I agree with. What he's saying is it should be banned at 24 weeks, and it shouldn't be allowed, and that there should be a lot of pressure placed on women prior to that not to choose to terminate their pregnancy, which I don't think it keeps faith with the idea that it is truly a woman's choice, particularly when you don't have someone opposing things like state laws that require doctors to say things that aren't scientifically accurate to women about their pregnancy. When you put all that together, I have a real problem with it. But politically, just putting all that aside and just putting on the political advisor strategist sort of hat, I think it's really the only path for them to talk about abortion at all in this election year.
Yeah, I think, the one thing about like him being like a better senator, like for sure on paper, there are a lot of things that indicate that. I just think we have no history of, in the recent memory, people being elected to the U.S. Senate as Republicans and being in any way responsible. It's usually the other way. It's the people who leave the Senate who show that kind of courage. So
the argument I could make for it is that ultimately the dude will have to run for re-election in Nevada if he wins, which would be the argument for him maybe trying to cut a path more like Toomey did in Pennsylvania, where he actually tried to work on.
It's funny that he's now our moderate. Remember when he was like the most extreme? That's how far that party has gone. But so from a Democrat's perspective, they have got to keep the focus on the courts. And I know this is a hard thing to do, but the Republicans have done this so successfully. Like, because the one thing this guy will not say is that he's going to vote against Trump-appointed judges. Like, he's not going to say that. And if he does, then let's get him on record saying that.
Absolutely, you're right. That's the issue. If you do not say that, then you are endorsing a ban, because the ban could still pass, and you're endorsing the ban being held up constitutionally. What I can also say about him, having watched the interview, is Um, it is a really compelling story. He and his wife. I mean, she was also an Army officer. She was actually an Army captain and dietitian who was his dietitian as he was recovering in the burn unit after he was wounded. And then they fell in love, and obviously she no longer was his dietitian, and they eventually got married. That I mean, it's a very compelling story, and they're a very compelling, like from what I saw, it's a very compelling couple of people. He's also clearly very ambitious. The
Yes.
guy, he ran for Senate too. Look, far be it from me to criticize people for running for things, but I'm not. But I was very ambitious, and so,
Yeah.
and which I think is, looking back, for those who had that as a criticism of my whether I could be trusted on this. Like, I don't think it's an unfair criticism for somebody who's very ambitious, right? And this is I don't think it's the criticism, but I think it's worth noting that he did run for office in Texas, then he moved to Nevada and ran. So I'm not saying that that is impeachable as to his character in any way. I am saying that in terms of feeling confident that he will sound the same post general election as he does pre general election, it gives me some pause that it's his third time running for office in a short period of time, and that it would be his first time winning.
Yeah, one thing, I mean, there's probably not an easy way to talk about this, but his very visible signs of his military service, like the wounds, um, I think are like really like a big part of the story here, because I wouldn't even be talking about this on the segment if I wasn't scanning the news and I saw the picture and I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And I clicked through it and I was like, oh, interesting. Right. So it's like one
Hmm.
of those things where, like, if you tell a story like John McCain, right, who was tortured, you could see it at some point, but it's not obvious on the surface right away. But the reason why his story was so compelling was because there were made for TV movies about it. He was a national hero. When I saw this guy, it reminds me of Dan Crenshaw a little bit. Like when I first saw Dan Crenshaw and the fact that he lost an eye, I really wanted to root for him, you know?
Hmm.
In some ways
Yeah.
there's some things he's done that are really puzzling, but in some ways that image stays with me in many ways. Like whenever he does something like buck his party on the immigration bill, I am always like, okay, this is part of his alert. I think this guy is a very serious candidate. That's why I'm raising it. It seems like you agree. This is a seat we cannot lose, people.
Yeah.
We cannot lose
Cool.
this seat.
Before we move on, can we say something about the whole military veterans as candidates thing, because it's changed over the last few years? uh, I think that when people look back at folks like myself who ran for office and maybe received more cross partisan support, partially because of our service, people think it's just, oh well, they're in the military, so people vote for them. I don't think that's what it is. I think that having served in the military, particularly in a time of war, is sort of a shorthand for voters that they use to say, okay, this person has done something harder than this. And so if I'm looking for someone who will demonstrate some sort of independent thinking, clearly this person has, in some capacity or another, demonstrated the ability to stand up and do things that are hard. And I think that the military is definitely not the only place where folks can demonstrate, get those sort of bona fides for voters. What I also see happening right now is that there is a very noticeable decline in the sort of pedestal effect for veterans that happened, post 9/11, right? I mean, for at least a 15, 16-year period after 9/11, veterans were, and military personnel generally were, propelled onto this sort of upper place in our society, this nearly worship place that, to be honest, I don't, as a veteran, I'll tell you, I don't think it's particularly healthy. But prior to that, we were in the complete other direction. And you can see this, and when you think about the way the military has been portrayed in popular culture pre and post 9/11. Pre 9/11, the movies about the military are like Pauly Shore and being in them, or Stripes and stuff like that. And it's, with some exceptions, mostly portrayed comedically and like a place where people go when they're not really that professional. Post 9/11, it was completely the opposite, right? And I think what's happening now is military veterans are settling into a more natural equilibrium in the way we're regarded in our society, more on plane with teachers, first responders, that sort of thing, which I think is probably more appropriate. so I say all that to say that while Sam Brown is somebody you look at and you say, clearly this guy has been through something more difficult than a campaign, and there's reason for that to be heartening as a voter. I just also think we're coming to a more natural place where voters don't exclusively see that through military experience. They can see that through all sorts of other kinds of life experience, which is, I think, a good thing.
Yeah, I think like my general feeling is interesting people are dangerous candidates. And this
Well
is an
said. Very well
interesting
said.
person. And you know, the point you made about the military stuff is really fascinating. And I'm not the 1,000th person to say this, but there was the pre and post Vietnam too, right? So post Vietnam, all the movies were like Rambo, Platoon, that were very negative, right?
Hmm.
And that dominated the portrayal of the military, and then they became a bit comedic, and then it was kind of, I feel like there was this period of sort of existential, like, drift when it comes to the military because we hadn't fought, you know, Desert Storm being what it is, we hadn't fought any war that lasted very long and really took a toll on us, right? So there was a generation really that was part of our generation as growing up. We were kind of divorced from like war, really,
Hmm.
until 9/11, when our generation, you know, especially in your case, was
Yeah.
asked to fight in it. Everything changes after that. And in some ways, it kind of went through a similar period where it was like, okay, positive portrayals for a while and all that. And then the cynical stuff took over pretty quickly too, right? And
And
it takes a
the
little
the
while.
the two wars that shaped a more positive depiction of the military over time have one thing in common. When you think about World War II, the way you know, the depictions of the military were overwhelmingly positive to the point of, I think, over the top. And 9/11, you could make the argument, a similar argument. What they had in common is that both of those were prompted by the United States being attacked.
Yeah.
And as a result, it affected the way people thought about the war and affected the way people thought about the soldiers in that war, which is not fair to the people who served in Vietnam. But anyway, it's a whole other thing. We should
Yeah.
move on to the next political thing. That's what people.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to breeze through a couple of things because we're going to run out of time. Nancy Mace was reelected. I don't think she deserves too much airtime. It just shows that, you know, per earlier point, there just really aren't that many moderates left running for reelection. She was the person all the Republicans in my life were telling me, oh, look at Nancy Mace. She's
Mhm.
so independent. She's speaking sense. Then she voted against McCarthy and has been basically gluing herself to MAGA ever since and survived a scare of a primary election. And then the final story here is, uh, you know, there's this piece in New York Magazine. Like, you know, I've been kind of following the polls since the verdict. And this piece, I think, pretty convincingly says that really no changes in the polls since the verdict. And so I just want to pour a little cold water out there for our audience. I know a lot of our friends in Democratic media have been grasping a bit at polls that suggest otherwise. But my reading, New York Times and New York Magazine's reading, seem to be that right now there hasn't been a meaningful movement in the polls.
Yeah, and I didn't expect there to be. I mean, look, I think that it will possibly permanently, at least temporarily, affect the way independent and moderate voters look at Trump. But I think it will mostly be on enthusiasm and not on will they vote for him or not. Right? I think it's on the margins, and it just, man, I'm a broken record, but I keep coming back to the idea that, like, we're right, they're wrong. Every poll and every special election, every midterm election seems to bear out the idea that voters think Democrats are right, the majority of voters, and Republicans are wrong, and that Republicans are too extreme. That's what persuadable voters believe when it comes to what Republicans want to do in office, when it comes to abortion, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to guns, certainly, and a whole lot of issues. And I just, I know it feels like I say it every week. There are no shortcuts. It's not going to be like a jury in Manhattan convicts him of a felony, and all of a sudden everybody goes, "Oh, wait a second, he was bad." It's not going to happen. Everybody thought, there were a lot of people voting for him who were like, "I don't like him. I think he's bad." But so this is not going to be what convinces those people, I don't think.
Yeah, and The Economist, they have their model that they just put out. They put the race right now in terms of probability as 1/3 chance for Biden, 2/3 chance for Trump. You know, people could read it. You could decide whether you like the methodology or not. Um, that's roughly what's going on in my head. And, you know, there's no sense in quibbling with is it a 1/3, 50-50, whatever, but this is winnable, is all I see.
Mhm.
It's not looking great, but it's winnable. And I would say coming up, we've got a few really important things. This is a very, very monumental series of weeks and months ahead of us. We've got the debates, which are going to be really important. We have an earlier debate than we've ever had before. We've got Trump's sentencing. So I think that can go one of two ways. I think no jail time almost assures that we see a very subdued reaction in the polls to this conviction, and that the staying power is pretty low. If he's handed jail time or prison time, then I think there's a chance that this sticks in some way, because that I think is a whole different uh, reality for the American public to wrap their heads around. And then we have the conventions. And so that is going to be fascinating. And I am glad the Democrats are going second, both because they have a chance to respond, but also hopefully, and I am really not that hopeful, but hopefully things will, you know, cool down and we'll see some kind of peace deal in the Middle East, although things aren't looking great there.
Yeah, no, they're both huge wild cards. The debates could be, and the convention. I'm very concerned about the convention because, you know, look, the folks who would protest a convention, um, interestingly, their disagreement is far greater with the Republicans than it is with the Democrats. But I don't get the sense that they would choose the Republican convention to protest. I get the sense that they would choose the Democratic convention for two reasons. One, Biden is currently the president. And two, the sense that they would protest where people were more persuadable. And so I do think it could go very poorly, because what is the main argument? One of the main arguments for Biden against Trump, it's Trump is chaos and we are competency. And if at your convention you seem to have chaos, a la the Chicago convention in what, 68, 70?
Yeah, I think 68 maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very bad. I think it could be very bad. So there are some really high wire points left. But your point is the most important, which is whether you believe that it's a 1/3 chance or more, we are in it. Like, you're in the game. You got to go try to win it.
Yeah, and I think it was Axelrod, and I apologize if I'm attributing this wrong, who was pointing to the fact that there is going to be a lot of, and vast majority, legitimate protesters, and then there's going to be some people who are Republican operatives who come there to try to, you know, turn up the temperature even more than it will be. And I worry a lot about this, and honestly, I'm planning ahead for this because I'm one of two things is going to be true, Jason. Either I'm going to be there in Chicago and I want to see it for myself, or I'm going to be somewhere where I am not watching it at all because I am really worried about this. You know,
I've never been to a Democratic convention nationally, which is
fascinating
probably what
stuff. I
people
went
do.
to 08, which was one of the best few days of my life.
I bet.
Yeah, and that's when I was
I
working for
bet.
ACT, so I had all the passes.
Oh,
Really
yeah.
awesome. I met
Yeah.
Muhammad Ali backstage there.
That's
It was
amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this was great. What's going on in Robbie's life?
What's happening? My sister got engaged today. Congratulations to her if she's listening.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she lives in Denver, and yeah, I think I'm just happy for her. She took a risk, moved out to Denver, not knowing anybody, and has a great job, has a great fiance, Steve, and getting married. Just bought a house not too long ago, so she's living it out there, man. How about you?
You know, just summer. It's just we're a lot of baseball, and for me, for True, and it's been super fun. True has a baseball tournament every weekend in June.
He must be getting tall, I'd imagine, at this point. I haven't seen him. In
He'd like to be a lot taller.
Tell him he needs to eat more. You could tell him I said
I
that.
know. I tell him all the time, and he knows that you feel that way and that we all feel that way. But his appetite is growing, which is good. But he,
God, I would give anything for that to be my problem, which is I don't
yeah, I
eat
know,
enough.
right? But he, yeah, and this week he is away at a basketball camp. And it's funny, he is at. We're actually going to pick him up today. He is at KU basketball camp because
Oh, wow.
a bunch of his friends on his baseball team and at his school live, here in Kansas City. Everything's right on the state line. We're on the Missouri side, but a lot of them live in Kansas, and they have, I guess, a great basketball camp there. So he went, but like he knows, like we're a Missouri family, and so it was funny because I was like, okay, now you're going off to college for 4 days. Like they stayed in the dorms, like the
Oh
whole
my God.
thing. So I can't wait.
It
to
must
hear
be
this. And I'm
super
like,
nice over there.
I think he's having a pretty good time. We like FaceTime with him at night, and he's exhausted, but he's like got his roommate, his buddy from
Is he
his
still doing
school.
that summer camp this summer, the one that's right down the street?
Yeah, he is.
Oh, yeah.
He does that too. So he's exhausted all the time. It's great. But he, he was like, Dad, I promise I won't come back a KU fan. And I'm like, you probably will. And I'm at the point, Mizzou fans listening to this won't like it. I'm at the point where I'm resigned to whatever. Like, I mean, I've grown up in the metro area. I'm a Mizzou fan, but like, whatever. I want my kids to go to school close to home. I'll take it. I don't care.
Right.
So anyway, it's going to be interesting to see, to get him back tonight and hear what his 4 days of college at 10 years old were like.
Yeah, I mean,
I
it would
can't
be
wait.
funny if he just zagged completely and was like a Liberty University fan or something. Like not Liberty. What's the one down the street? What's the one in Liberty, Missouri?
You're talking about William Jewell.
William Jewell. He's like a William Jewell fan. I don't even know if they have a
I'd be all for that.
Yeah.
That'd be great. He'd be close
Love
to
that
home.
town. Shout out to Liberty, Missouri. Some good memories there.
We just played a baseball tournament there.
I've stayed there 3 times at William Jewell College.
Amazing. Not a lot of New Yorkers can say that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. You can find Ravi at Ravi M. Gupta on social, and I'm at Jason Kander. Please leave a 5-star review. Thank you to the Midas Mighty. And remember, we all have a platform. Make sure to use yours today.